Hi again, everyone. Welcome to another video here from Caribbeanology. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully the title of this video caught your attention, and hopefully I can get you to stick around until the end, okay? So I'm going to say some things that may steer or curve away from perhaps the general understanding of things right now. But again, hopefully you stick around until the end of this video to see what my conclusions are. You pretty much can tell by the title already what they probably would be, but who it's coming from may surprise you. The first question I want to ask you is this. Some of you may know, some of you may not. But what does a place like Nigeria, or I should say places like Nigeria, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Palestine, Israel, if you want to call it that, South Africa, and a few other places in the world, what do they all have in common as a common denominator? And I should also add two other countries, Venezuela and Guyana. What do they all have in common? What is a common denominator? If you said the British, you would be absolutely right. The British had something to do with all of those places that I mentioned and their destinies once the British was finished with them. Now, I can go into the history of those other places, but one thing about all those places that I mentioned, there have been residual conflicts during and after the British left those locations. We now see what's going on in the land of Israel, Palestine. There is a raging war that is going on where there have been murders, and there is an ongoing subsequent genocide that is going on right now. A lot of people will go ahead and say that Israel is being extremely heavy-handed in their retaliation towards Hamas, which I'm not saying a choir boys by any stretch, but Israel has been very heavy-handed. But this video today is not about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. This video has to do with a brewing conflict. Tensions right now are rather high in the countries of Venezuela and Guyana. Now, understand this, as the title states, my wife is Guyanese. I have been to the country 7 times. Not only, that's one reason why I am endeared to the country. I love that country. It is my wife's country. I've been there 7 times, felt nothing but love, peace, comfort, really enjoy going there. I wish I was there right now. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that Guyana is considered to be a part of the Caribbean community, no matter what some people may say. It's considered to be a part of the Caribbean community. I am also from the Caribbean. I am from the United States Virgin Islands. So on just that alone, there is a solidarity with Guyana. Venezuela, believe it or not, though many people may not think of it this way, is also a part of the Caribbean, because its whole northern, at least most of it, or a portion of it, is along the Caribbean coastline. So technically, Venezuela is also a part of the Caribbean. Whether or not they're accepted in the wider Caribbean community that we understand to be the Caribbean is another story. But geographically speaking, geologically speaking, or I should say geographically speaking, you know, because of where they are, I mean, of course, they're on the South American plate, but their northern coastline brushes against the Caribbean Sea. So if you want to get technical, you can say, yeah, you know, their country is a part of the Caribbean, geographically speaking. But beyond that, and getting back to the point of this video, does Venezuela have a point? Do they have a claim? I would say that they actually do. Whether or not that claim comes to pass is another story. And I wouldn't want to see it come to pass because I don't want to see Guyana lose 3/4 of its territory, its current territory right now. That's number one. I wouldn't want there to be a war to determine that. And I wouldn't want Venezuela to have to suffer any more because of further isolation for any actions that they may do or carry out toward Guyana. Don't want to see any of that at all. But being objective right now, so I'm not sitting around with a bunch of Guyanese people like, yeah, Venezuela can't come over here and do this, and Venezuela can't do that, and I'm not sitting around with them right now. I'm sitting in front of a camera. And in front of this camera, I'm trying to be as objective as possible. We have to look now and just keep in mind, lights went off. I'm sorry about that for the darkness. So let me try to see if I can bring this light back. Okay, hold on. There we go. I got to keep that in mind. There's a sensor out here and I got to keep that in mind. Don't know where the sensor is at, but I have to keep that in mind in case I go dark again because I'm not using my own lighting. It's the lighting here in the building. But we have to keep the British track record in mind. So there's more than enough material out there to explain the start of this conflict or the reason for this conflict. But there's some details that seems to be left out. And most of the information that's put out there, it's not put out there, it's more or less neutral. These are the facts. You make your determination as to what you want to think about it. So unless you're reading something that's Guyanese-centric, that's going to favor the Guyanese argument, or something that's Venezuelan-centric, that's going to favor the Venezuelan argument, most of the other material is just, here are the facts. This is what happened, and no one is making a verdict and saying this group is right, or this country is right, or whatever. But for me, just by looking at the information, that is what I want to talk about today. So the first order of business that you have to consider is the fact that when this conflict or when this tension started, Venezuela was a brand new country up against the British that had been an empire for a few centuries, powerful, influential, have money, known all around the world, have their hands here, their hands there, and everything. Venezuela now is just a small upcoming country that had gotten their independence, in a decade before, I think it was? Because we're now talking about the 1840s when this conflict started, whereas Venezuela became a country somewhere in the 1830s. Now, the area that is of dispute, when the British acquired that area we call Guyana today, from the Dutch, for some reason, the western side of the area that they acquired from the Dutch, there was no border stipulated to say this is the border right here. Everything else was okay, it seems, on the eastern side up against what we call Suriname today. But going westward, it's as though no one really thought about that. And it would make perfect sense because that area of what we call Guyana today is known as the Essequibo. And it's sparsely populated. There are populations of people out there, at least today, but back then it was even more sparsely populated. Just nothing but forests, nothing but trees, nothing but bushes, nothing really going on out there. So if you think about it, the Essequibo is on the western side of Guyana, whereas Guyana's population centers are more along the eastern side, the northern side, but more toward the east. The city of Georgetown, New Amsterdam further out to the east, and of course all the population centers within the metropolitan area of Georgetown. So this area known as the Essequibo, it's out there, just out there. Nobody's really paying much attention to what's going on out there. In Venezuela now, the Essequibo is way to the east, away from Caracas, their capital. Again, away from their major population centers. So this was more or less like no man's land. It was like how the United States was back in the day, or if you want to call it that, where like you had Washington, D.C., you had New York, you had Philadelphia and all the East Coast cities. And then out west is like no man's land. It's just out there, not settled by too many people, sparsely populated, still like that in some places. That's kind of how the Essequibo was in those days. Just out there, no one is really paying attention to it. You know, people just living their lives. But when the British acquired that land from the Dutch, they came down and they wanted to establish that western border. Now, I can only speculate. This is not something that's been proven. This is not something that's factual. But apparently the British, I want to believe that they were tipped off that there was something out there in that area that would benefit them in the future. I don't know. This is a speculation on my part. But anyway, they more or less took the initiative to do something about that area as opposed to the Venezuelans, again, which was just a new country. So the British come down, they hire a German surveyor and said, listen, go out to that western end out there of this new territory that we have acquired from the Dutch. And I want you to go ahead and delineate, draw a line, draw a border between what we think is, what we believe is ours and what the Venezuelans have over on that side. Now, on the surface, you would think it made more sense. On the east, Guyana has 3 major rivers. I guess you can throw in 4, but 3 major rivers, at least within its territory. But on the eastern side, you have the Corentyne River. That Corentyne River separates what is today Guyana to the west and Suriname to the east. So right there, there's a border. There's a country on the eastern side of this river. It's called Suriname. Meanwhile, within Guyana itself, you move up to the Berbice River. So the lands between the Corentyne and the Berbice, that's Guyana's land. Then you go from the Berbice River over to Demerara River. The Demerara River, which is where Georgetown is at and more or less along the population center. In between the Berbice River and the Demerara River, that land in between also belongs to Guyana. So you have land here for Guyana, land here for Guyana. Then from the Demerara River, you go over to the Essequibo River. The land in between here is also part of Guyana. Now, you would think now, when we get to the Essequibo, the next major river is way over in Venezuela called Orinoco. It's the land beyond the Essequibo going west. That's the land area that the British came in and said, we're taking this too. We're grabbing this. Now, there's something to keep in mind. When the British took over the Dutch land, or they acquired the lands from the Dutch, the Venezuelans did not come in and say, hey, you can't be taking that land between the Corentyne and Berbice, the Berbice rivers. That's our land. There was no argument from them. Nowhere to be seen. They weren't fussing about that. When it came to the land between the Berbice River and the Demerara River, it's like, hey, that's yours. We don't have a problem with that. When it came to the land between the Demerara and the Essequibo River, Venezuelans, no dispute from them, no argument. But once it went past the Essequibo, then they came up and said, no, British, no, that's not your land. That tells me that there must have been an understanding or a belief prior to this dispute, prior to the British coming in, that that land belonged to Venezuela, or it was understood as being a part of, well, the Spanish territory prior to it becoming the country of Venezuela. So Venezuela's argument is the land from Essequibo going west belongs to us. It was a part of the Spanish Empire prior to the Dutch and prior to the British showing up. So in order for Venezuela, it kind of leads me to believe that it was understood that land belongs to Venezuela. But then the British came in and they said, well, we're going to grab all this land from the Essequibo West, and we're going to take all of this land. So I think the British acquired an additional 33,000 square miles of land. The Venezuelans had an issue with that. They said, no, that land belongs to us. But not much really went on. It was just, again, Venezuela's a new country. I mean, they're standing up against the British Empire. What are they going to do? What are they going to say? They don't have the power and might and influence of the British Empire. But then, I think in the following decade, gold was discovered in the area, which is why I have a feeling that the British were tipped off prior, you know? I think they were tipped off prior, and that's why they went ahead and made that grab. Like, let's just grab this land real quick. But now that gold was discovered officially, the British decided, let's grab some more land. And as far as I know, they went and grabbed even more land, all the way to the Orinoco River. So now they're going all the way from the Quarantine River to the Berbice River, to the Demerara River, to the Essequibo River, all the way over to the Orinoco River, and saying, we're grabbing that too. And Venezuela was like, no. You guys are like getting ridiculous with this right now. So what does Venezuela do? Knowing that they don't have the power, the might to stand up against the British Empire, they appeal to the United States at the time. The United States is now an emerging power. And the United States had this policy, they probably still do, called the Monroe Doctrine. And that Monroe Doctrine basically stated that on the west side of the Atlantic, any lands on this side, if there is a former colonial power, the British, the French, the Dutch, the Danes, if they are trying to come over and claim new lands on this side of the world, we're going to consider it a threat to the United States. Now, the lands that may be under threat of being reclaimed or taken over or invaded may not have anything to do with the United States, may not even be a part of U.S. soil. But the United States, with their arrogance, basically said, all lands on this side of the Atlantic, we're going to defend it if any colonial powers are coming over here. Because, of course, we want to be the one to exploit everybody else. We don't want them doing it. So Venezuela, knowing this, that they're on the western side of the Atlantic, that they're on the side over in the side of the Atlantic where the United States is at, figured, let's go to the United States and appeal to them and say, hey, employ the Monroe Doctrine. The British are trying to come over here and take over our land. They're coming to try to take over land that belong to us. And they're trying to, bring an incursion into areas, and they're land grabbing the United States. I hope you're keeping an eye on what they're doing. And we're coming to you that you can stand up and stand on your Monroe Doctrine. The United States initially did not really pay much attention to it. But after a while, it got to a point where it was like, you know what? Yeah, we need to settle this matter. Because the United States is an emerging power at this time, they put pressure on England and said, listen, you got to take this thing to arbitration. You guys have got to go ahead and settle this. The British grudgingly decided, let's go ahead and go and settle this. Imagine the Venezuelans realizing the United States pressured England to come to the arbitration table to discuss about, matters about this land area. So the Venezuelans, I could understand, feeling rather confident, agreed to this arbitration, and so did the British. Well, I don't remember who representatives were. I know at least two. At the arbitration hearing, there were American representatives, there were British representatives, and the person who was over the arbitration meeting was a Russian, supposed to be neutral. Missing from this arbitration meeting, as far as I understand, I don't know if this is accurate, but this should be the first red flag if it is. There were no Venezuelan representatives. So the Venezuelans, I don't know if it's because they felt confident that they were going to win, why no one was there representing them, or they just weren't invited. I really don't know what the situation is. Something I have to take a look into a little bit more. But then when the ruling came down, the ruling went in favor of the British. There was only one thing the British had to give back, and that was that extra piece of land that they tried to grab even further west, going up to the Orinoco. The court basically said, no, you've got to give that back. But the original land that you delineated with the German surveyor, you can keep that. But Venezuela still said, no, that's still our land. Okay, you gave us back the other piece, but that is the original part that we were disputing, and we want our land back. Well, it went in favor of the British. Venezuela grudgingly agreed to the arbitration and said, okay, well, you know what? So the court said, I guess we'll just put our tails between our legs and go home and just leave things as the way that they are. But We know it really belongs to us, but I guess we'll accept it. I guess we'll accept it for now. So things went on. Venezuela still had in their mind the land belonged to them. They did not launch a war into Guyana. They did not go and start any trouble with them. I think every now and again, I think there was some tension here and there, a little flare up here and there, but nothing major ever came out of it. Fast forward to the 1960s. Venezuela, again, I can't verify this, but they made a claim that stated, you know what, we're looking back over that case back in the 1890s. And we have reason to believe that the Russian presider over that meeting was bribed by the Americans and by the British. Venezuela making that claim, we might say, Venezuela, you're just talking. But judging the track record of the United States and the British, what are the chances that you think that may be true? That they went in there and the Russian judge who's over all of this, they may have gone in and like, hey, listen, you know what? This Venezuela, young country. Why do we have to pay attention to them? They're beneath us. They're like a third world country. Look at us. The United States and England? We run the world. Or the United States was at least getting to that point, at least with their influence. We run the world. Why do we have to succumb and give in to them? Give it to us. So Venezuela is thinking that money's passed onto the table or some kind of bribe is made. I think the claim goes that Venezuela said, or at least the understanding was, that the British bribed by basically saying, listen, if you allow us to win this arbitration meeting, this hearing, if you allow us to win, hey, we'll open up this place, our colony known as British Guyana. We'll open it up to you guys to come and explore and exploit and grab all what you want. We'll make an agreement to open it up to you guys. But if you leave it with the Venezuelans, who knows what you're going to get? So knowing that countries are always looking for resources, always looking to enrich themselves, especially those former colonial powers, the United States. What can we get out of this? And the British apparently told them, this is what you can get out of it if you allow us to win. Now, whether that is what happened or not, I don't know, but it's more or less the claim that Venezuela made. But we can look back now and realize the British and the Americans, how they have operated in geopolitics, and realize that they have done things like that. It's not too far-fetched what Venezuela is saying didn't really happen. So now we jump forward to the present time. And of course, oil is discovered off the coast of Guyana. And when that oil is discovered, and this is where Venezuela looks pretty bad with this, because if you just ask the average person in the street who knows nothing what's going on, they're going to look at the situation and realize, well, keep this in mind. Here in this country, of course, we have been brainwashed into thinking that any time we hear the word socialism, it must mean something bad. It must mean something evil. It's like communism, socialism, oh my God, no. So Venezuela is considered to be a socialist country. So right off the bat, they're blacklisted. That's number one. So of course now you've got to create the whole image of a lunatic dictator down there, and he's doing this. And of course, this guy is not without blame for a lot of problems there, right? And the way that they handle their socialist policies, of course, have afflicted their country in certain ways. Doesn't mean that socialism necessarily is bad. How it was applied there, that's another story. That's what it's in the application, not so much within the philosophy. So Venezuela already has this blacklist on its name because of the word socialism attached to it. Number two, they are a large country, relatively speaking, compared to Guyana. Guyana is nowhere near the size of Venezuela. I wouldn't be surprised at least 5 or 6 Guyanas, maybe more, maybe less, I don't know, can fit within Venezuela. So the other image is like this big, gigantic country. It's trying to go and grab land from another country that's already relatively narrow, and you want to take even, not you want to take a quarter of it, you want to take like 3/4 of that land and leave them as a little sliver in South America. The optics look bad. So people see that stuff and it's like, nah, Venezuela, man, you have more than enough. Then there's oil in Guyana. But Venezuela is the one with the largest oil reserves in the world. So Venezuela has more than enough oil. So it's like, well, we have more than enough, but we want to go ahead and grab more. That also looks bad. Then the fact is, Venezuela has all this oil. And it's a whole complex story, but they have all this oil and it has not benefited them, at least in recent years. It did benefit them some time back. Made them one of the richest countries in the world at one point. But today, because of so many complexities, that oil is not benefiting them in any way, at least monetarily. As a matter of fact, it's more like a curse at this point, and people refer to this as a Dutch curse. So it's like, okay, well, we're going to try to grab more oil by grabbing more land where there's oil. And when we do so, what is it going to do? It's not benefiting you now. You're going to grab more headaches by trying to grab more oil rigs, all these different things. You don't have the money to maintain what you currently have, much less to try to go ahead and grab more land to do something else. So all of those things does not put Venezuela in a very good light. And now they're raising the prospects of annexing that land, of like, you know, in Guyana, there's a fear that they're going to invade and they're going to forcefully come in and take that land back. So now that we're at that level, now it makes it look as though with Venezuela, we're only doing this because we're jealous. Look at what they have over there. They have oil. Don't pay attention to all the oil we have. They have oil. We want to get that. And in order for us to get that oil, we've got to get the land and claim it for ourselves, so then we can turn around and say that oil that's off the coast, it belongs to us. So it looks very bad on Venezuela in so many regards. So on that note, I would say, Venezuela, you need to keep quiet, sit down somewhere, and leave things the way that they are. Now, where this becomes even more complicated, just like you have in Palestine, where it becomes really complex and really a big mix-up. The original issue was between the new country of Venezuela, and the British Empire. Okay? Problem is, the British Empire no longer exists. It's gone. Now you have a country that has been left from its remnants, known as England. That was always the headquarters, that was always the base, basically. That was the seat of the empire. But the wider empire, that's gone. Its policies, its missions, its whatever it did, that's gone. Now you have the country of England that emerged. I shouldn't say emerged, but, well, I guess you can say emerged, you know. It was the empire. The empire fell apart, and it was left with just the seat of power. So, technically speaking, the British Empire no longer exists. And here's Venezuela, so who are you arguing with? Then, at the time when the dispute was going on, the British had a colony there known as British Guyana. That colony is no longer there. Venezuela, who are you arguing with? A new country came in place, and that country is now Guyana. And Guyana assumed all of that land that the British Empire once claimed in that region, today in the area of Guyana, Venezuela. So this new country, older than them, now wants to have an argument with a country that really had nothing to do with the dispute in the first place. So that just clouds matters even more. But if I had to be objective, if I had to look back, if I had to look at the track record of the British, I have to say that Venezuela was shafted. They were. But they agreed to the arbitration way back when. And then they decided, we're not agreeing with that anymore because we're crying foul. We're crying that there was fraud. Something went on that allowed this ruling to go into favor of the British. And it's unfair. And that's their argument. But again, they're bringing up the argument. Not to say they didn't bring it up before. They did, but of course, it wasn't with all of this, the bells and whistles, and with the internet nowadays to stir up all the fear and possibility of war and possibility of invasion and so on. So it probably didn't get as much attention back then. But in today's world, it's getting quite a bit of attention, at least in some corners of the world. Whether there's going to be a conflict or not, I can't say. I can't predict. It will be very, 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 very bad for Venezuela to try to do that. Because number one, you're talking about ExxonMobil, an American company. It's oiled. Lots of money involved. You already know because the United States has done this before. Many multinational corporations or national corporations, whenever it happened in Central America, whenever they're not having their way or getting their way in other people's countries, they run to Washington. They're not playing fair. Come and invade this country and whatever. They have done that. The United States have done that. The CIA have done that. They did that in Central America. They did that down in Chile in South America. They're not playing fair. They're not letting us exploit their land like we want to. And we're mad. So can you go ahead and send the army down there and deal with them or create something to give us a reason for invading their country? So Venezuela doesn't want that. They don't want that on their resume. So they might want to go ahead and just leave that alone. So right now, it will just not fare well for Venezuela. Not to mention the fact that ExxonMobil probably has an axe to grind against Venezuela because Hugo Chavez, the previous president, had kicked them out of his country. Because, of course, they're exploiting and grabbing the bulk and the lion's share of whatever wealth is out of there. And he kicked them out. So you know they have an axe to grind against Venezuela. No love lost. So they would probably love to see a few bombs dropped in that country. Take that for kicking us out. We're going to buddy up with our new friend over here, Guyana. We're going to exploit all from them. We're going to show them how this Dutch curse works. So again, being objective, I have to say I believe that Venezuela was shafted, shortchanged. I believe the British knew something back in the 1840s and said, well, you would thought they would have just said, hey, you know what? Let's just end our... We don't know what the Dutch claim because I'm sure the Dutch had people living over in the Essequibo back in those days. Again, because it was no man's land, more or less. Everybody just doing whatever they want to do out there. It's way far away. They probably didn't even know these people existed out there. But it would have made sense to me. The British would have said, okay, the Essequibo River is here. And since all this land up to a certain point goes into Venezuela, well, you know what? We'll just cut things off at the Essequibo. And everything in between the Orinoco and the Essequibo would belong to Venezuela. But I have a feeling the British saw something, saw some potential, knew something. And it was like, hey, let's grab that quick, before Venezuela develops into a more powerful nation, before they grow up and grow out of infancy. And it's like, no, you're not coming over to mess with our land. So the British were like, let's grab that really quick. And when they grabbed it, just the fact that they went ahead and grabbed even more land after gold was discovered, to me indicates or implies what they did to get that first piece of land that they claim was theirs. Because if they got that piece of land and said, we're drawing a line right here, all this belongs to us, and Venezuela is saying, no, it doesn't, it belongs to us. And the British says, well, okay, we know we drew this line the other day and said that all this belongs to us, but you know what, we're going to grab some more. Because we found gold, we're going to grab even more. That to me gives you a little bit of an insight into perhaps how the British handled this back then. So again, another hot mess that the British left behind. They left behind a mess there because of their greed, because of their sense of expansion, grabbing as much as they can. Don't care who lives there, don't care what's going on, just their interests. But what they left behind, like they left behind in Israel or Palestine, like what they left in the Indian subcontinent, what they left in Nigeria that led to the Biafran War, what they left behind in South Africa, all those places erupted into violence, erupted into wars between people who, prior to that, were probably living peacefully. So I have to sit here and agree with Venezuela on this one. Again, my wife is Guyanese, love Guyana. And even though I agree with Venezuela, does not mean I agree with Venezuela annexing or invading Guyana if that's what their plans are. I am against that. Leave things the way that it is, the way that they are right now. Leave the Guyanese people alone. Leave them with the land that has been established as theirs since the 1800s, or at least when it came over to them in the 1960s, that has been established as theirs. That's the way I look at it. So on one hand, I can agree, Venezuela, you do have an argument. You have a very, very good argument. But leave the Guyanese people alone. You don't need to be messing with them and their land right now. How do you look as this gigantic country in comparison to Guyana? As a country that has the same resources you're trying to grab. You have the largest reserve in the world over there right now. It's not benefiting you. And you want to grab more? You want to take on more of this? What is wrong with, you know what? We have our own. We have a vast territory of our own. Let's not be greedy. Let's just leave things alone and just call it a day and just say, okay, Guyana, you know what? You guys can have it. Knock yourself out. We have exactly what we're trying to grab from you right now. We have more than enough of that. Land, we have more than enough of that. Oil, we have more than enough of that. Population, we have Venezuela's population. I don't even know what the number is. 50 million? I could be wrong, but they have countless millions of people. Guyana doesn't even have 1 million people in the country. So don't cause any problems. Don't disrupt the area. Don't make it any more unstable than it probably is already. Just leave things alone. That would be my request to Venezuela. So again, on the one hand, Venezuela, you have a great argument. I side with you. You're actually probably right in what you're saying. Your claim to the land, I could understand where that is coming from. But at this juncture, and at this point, it's just best well to leave enough alone. And what you can probably do is cooperate with the country of Guyana. They may become your friend in these difficult times that you're going through. They may become your ally in these difficult times that you're going through. Not to mention in the Essequibo River, there are people who have intermingled on both sides. There are Amerindians who have children with Venezuelans. There are Venezuelans who have children with Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, and all of that's going on in between there. Why disrupt all of that? Just leave it alone. And instead of looking for a fight, or looking for tension or conflict, why don't you just go to the table and sit down and say, hey, we need help. At this point, we need your help. How can we cooperate together to live in peace as neighbors and make the area productive? Maybe at some point, both of you can become economic powers on your own right, in your own right, or together, and both celebrate in prosperity. Venezuela, I understand that you're going through some difficult times right now. You should not be looking for enemies. You should be looking for friends. Anyway, that's my thought on this for right now. You guys take care, and till the next video. I see I'm getting a call, but thank you so much if you stuck all the way around to the end. I really appreciate it. Okay, you guys take care. Bye-bye.